In this video, we're going to talk about the few basic relief types that Relief Maker supports and talk about why you might want to use some of them over the others. Relief type is located here, and there are three options, but there's also one option located here, and it's not to be forgotten, so we'll talk about that in just a second. The raised relief type is probably what you mostly assume when you hear about reliefs. Let's go ahead and click Generate and just see what that looks like. This is your standard run-of-the-mill relief. This is what you'll use to generate shallow, base, and mid reliefs depending on your height scale. So if you want it to be really shallow, maybe you're making a coin or something, you might choose a low value here. And if you're trying to machine something on a CNC machine to really make it pop, maybe you'll exaggerate it to 100. This might be too big, but we'll see. So this is how you can play with raised reliefs. Now, recessed reliefs is the second option. You should consider this to be called advanced recessed reliefs. For the most part, ignore this option for now. We'll talk about that in a second. If you want to take a random relief and invert it, the easiest way to do that is to click Inverted Heights. Let's turn this option on and press Generate Relief. And we can see that now the model is actually inverted. And you can use this to really interesting effect. There's a well-known optical illusion, especially with faces. You can see he looks like he's facing this way, but as we rotate the model, it looks like he's always facing our direction. And if you were to machine this and put it on your wall, you would see this effect as you walked around it. Super cool stuff. But anyway, the fastest way to achieve a sunken relief is to use a raised relief with inverted heights turned on. The next type of relief we're going to talk about right now, since we've done raised and the easier way to do recessed, which is down here, we're going to talk about unconstrained. Unconstrained is basically like a raised relief, but let's compare and contrast the two. We'll generate a raised relief, and a raised relief is going to force the entire model to be above the plane. And in many cases, that is a requirement. For coin design, for example, that would be a requirement, and certainly other cases. But other cases where you don't really care if it goes a little bit below the model, below the back plane, that is what an unconstrained model does. And this is a good example of some random cases where an unconstrained model might be desirable. Because while most of the model looks great, there are some areas, for example, this ear, where some flattening is occurring. And we know there's actual detail here. Why isn't it showing up? Well, the reason is because we're using a raised model, and for whatever reason, the algorithm is not able to generate the required detail here without digging further into the plane than we are allowing it to. So if we were going to go and type in unconstrained here and regenerate it, you're going to notice that most of the model is going to look identical. But if we pay attention to this part, we're going to get a little bit more detail. So let's generate that and see what it looks like. Right? So it's very close, but we get a much more dynamic appearance. And if we look from the side, we can see that we actually get a divot here. And this may be a little bit too extreme in terms of the height scale. So let's change this to 65. And that's a little bit more reasonable. So it gives us more opportunity for depth. And the consequence of that is that were we to machine this, not only do we have to have enough material to cover the top, we have to have enough material underneath it to be able to accommodate where the drill bit, for example, is going to have to go into the material to mill that section. So just be aware that an unconstrained relief, by definition, allows the relief to dig into the back plane, whereas a raised relief, by definition, does not. So we see no material underneath. And that's a practical implication, mostly for people who are doing CNC work or coin design or things like that. Finally, we're going to dive into what recessed means here. And as we pointed out earlier, recessed this should be called advanced recessed relief. Again, the easiest way to make recessed relief with the minimal amount of work is to choose raised and inverted heights. But we're going to dig a little bit deeper. Why does this thing exist if this option is here? Well, if we go ahead and just choose recessed, And by default, inverted slopes will be off, so I'm going to turn it off now. You can see what it looks like. If you just choose recessed and press generate, you're going to get a weird result. It's going to look something like this. And that's because recessed expects the things that we want recessed to have inverted slopes turned on. So if we choose inverted slopes and do it again, we're going to get something very similar to what we would have gotten with the inverted heights. So then why does this exist? Well, you can actually have an interesting interplay with different models. So let me turn on a giraffe model. This giraffe does not have inverted slopes turned on, but it's in front of this elephant that does have it turned on. So if we make a recessed relief out of this, we're going to get a really interesting result where the elephant in general is recessed, but the giraffe on top of it is actually not recessed. So you can combine models in front of each other, and by combining inverted slopes with non-inverting slopes, you can get really interesting results that you wouldn't otherwise be able to achieve unless you were using this advanced recessed mode. This is something you'll need to play with to get the hang of, but we've told you how to do the recessed the most easy way, and if you want to start playing with these combinations of recessed and regular that are in the same model, well, this is how you do that. We hope that this different combination of relief types is going to give you incredible creative potential, and we can't wait to see what you make.